Welcome back. In our previous session, we have seen our first project and we have designed our first job to print a message "Hello World" in the screen. Now let's go ahead and see what are the further changes and additions that can we do for our job. Here, we see that there is a component that is available in the designer window. The best practice always is to rename this component with a more meaningful name that this is associated with. This is because when we have multiple T message boxes on a same job in the designer window, it would be difficult for you to understand which message box is printing which message. So let's say this message box, go to component and go to the view, and here the label format will help you to edit the name that we give to this component. Clear this up and let's say this is our first message. Give it. You can always see what type of component is it here. So since it's a T message box component, that name is always here. However, this would be renamed to the new label that we give for. This helps in clear identification of the purpose of that particular component. Well, now let's say we have another message box. We have this T message box too. Now we would go ahead and do that to give it like a second message. So now this makes it clear which message is going to go first and then which message is coming second. Also, when you click on this, you would be seeing the next incremented version of this component. So this helps us in identifying the unique message box name that it has for. So if you go ahead and create a third one, that would come up as T message box _3. So the best practice is always go to the view part from the component pane and then change the label for the message box. That will help in clear understanding and good visualization of a description for each component that we are building in the Talend job. Well, let me delete this one. Again, you can always delete component by right clicking and then go ahead and delete. This is option 1. So let me create another message box. You can also delete by select this component here and then press delete from your keyboard. So that is disappeared. So these are the two quick options that you can use for deleting any of the components that are available in the designer window. Now that we have built our first job and we have ran it and we have seen how do we display the message, let's see and understand what are these various tabs that are present here. So how to manage these tabs? Now because I don't have any purpose with this palette, I'm going ahead and closing this. So this is minimized. Well, now we have a clear view of the job window. So this job window gives you the descriptions of the job, like the basic descriptions on which version it is. In case you want to increment the version, go ahead and click on the capital M. This would increment the higher version. And small m will increment the minor version. Small m stands for minor and capital M stands for major version of it. And then you have the job creation date and when was it last modified, and you also have the purpose and description that we have entered during our job creation. And we also have the status of the environment which we are working, if it's a development or a testing or a production environment. Now there are some other options for extra: stats and logs and version. Version gives us the history. So let's say you have incremented the version to 1.0. Tomorrow you increment it and this would go back and then the first version, like the 1.0 version, would be displayed here. This version is the tab where we where we track the previous versions of the job that are available. Stats and logs are used in dynamic running of jobs when we want to do analysis on the statistics of how much time the job is running, and when we want to catch some logs, and when we want to see the volumetrics. We will come back to this option and we will explore how can we make use of this option. Before that, there are some other options like use project settings and multi-thread execution. We would also come back to this once we have some hang on the jobs, when we build, like, let's say some multiple jobs, and then we are familiar with building a job, then we would come back to all this extra settings. Well, yes, the main is where you have the basic details that are related to the job. Now further, there is a context tab. So you can always add a context by clicking on plus, and that would create a context here. I would explain what is a context in our further sessions. For now, assume it as a variable which can hold a value. It can be a string or it can be a number. So that's a context. Component is where we have seen the settings related to that particular component, that it is there in the designer pane. So you realize it, if you don't click on this component, it will always be empty because I have not selected here. The component is not displaying any properties. So this component pane is specific for whichever the component that we select in the designer window. If you are a beginner and if you're trying to do some edit for a particular component, and if you're not seeing any components or any properties here, remember that you have not selected the component here. Go ahead and click on this. That's where you would see the settings that are related to this component. So it's like this one. You have selected the job altogether. For this component, there are specific properties. To get that, you have to go ahead and select here. So now you see this square dotted line box that it's selected here. Yes, that is when you have selected that particular component. So if you see this round box, it indicates that when you have another component and when you join all these components, that selects for one particular sub job or a job that you have selected. For you to see the properties that are related to this particular component, always go ahead and click it at the center of the component, which would give you a dotted squared box here that you're able to see. And then this will give you the properties. What do we have here? We have basic settings that gives a title, button, icon and message. Understand that these properties are only related to T message box. Once we have another component, let me take a T file, input delimited. Well, I have this component created here. See, again, I select this part and you see different set of properties that are available here. So these are different. So these properties that a component gives are specific to each of the component that we select in the designer window. I hope I am clear at this part. Go ahead and create a couple of components and swap across the component tab of each of the component. Then you will see how the properties are different for each of the components. For now, go ahead. Let's delete this. Let's work on this. And we have buttons wherein you have a connection setting. Now that this is an individual component and it doesn't have any steps before this or after this, I have just given OK here. In case if you want a condition to be given, for example, when you want to abort, retry and ignore, this kind of conditions that you want to give, you can go ahead and give those conditions. Well, yes, this is the description of the message we have seen. Advanced settings, dynamic settings, view and documentation, we will come back to this along with other components. When we go ahead and explore further components of that, few of the settings would be common for them. View is common for all the components that we are looking. This always has label format, and then you can always go ahead and edit the label format to display the title here. That's for view.